Family loyalty is supposed to be absolute, making betrayal by your own flesh and blood cut the deepest. Cora believed she was finally getting a chance at love when her twin sister set her up on a blind date. Instead, she walked into a cruel, calculated prank designed for viral humiliation. Surrounded, laughed at, and entirely broken, she braced for the worst until the most dangerous man in the city walked over, silenced the room with a single look, and altered the trajectory of her life forever. Twins are universally romanticized as sharing a soul, a secret language, an unbreakable bond forged in the womb. But for Cora and Chloe, Hastings sharing a face was where the similarities abruptly ended. While they possessed the same auburn hair and striking hazel eyes, their spirits belonged to entirely different worlds. Chloe was the golden child, loud, demanding, and utterly obsessed with climbing the social ladder. She spent her days curating a pristine, luxurious life on social media, funded heavily by their enabler parents. Cora, on the other hand, was the shadow. She worked a quiet job as an archivist at a historical library, wore oversized sweaters, and preferred the company of dusty first editions to the flashing lights of exclusive nightclubs. For 24 years, Cora had endured her sister's subtle and sometimes not-so-subtle cruelties. Chloe viewed Cora not as a sister, but as a convenient foil to make her own light shine brighter. If Chloe was the glamorous swan, Cora was forced to play the ugly duckling. The nightmare began on a rainy Tuesday evening. Cora was sitting in her cramped, modestly furnished apartment when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. "Hey, I know we haven't been close lately, but Liam has this friend. His name is Oliver. He's a tech investor, super sweet, but he's been complaining about how superficial the women in our circle are. I immediately thought of you. I showed him your picture, and he practically begged me to set you guys up. Friday night. Le Jardin. Don't embarrass me." Cora stared at the screen, her heart doing a confusing flutter of anxiety and hope. Chloe doing something nice for her. It felt entirely unprecedented, but the lingering loneliness of the past 3 years since her last disastrous breakup weighed heavily on her. Maybe Chloe was finally maturing. Maybe this was an olive branch. For the next 3 days, Cora allowed herself the rare luxury of hope. She dipped into her meager savings and bought a stunning midnight blue silk dress that hugged her curves in ways her usual wardrobe never did. She spent hours watching makeup tutorials, carefully accentuating her hazel eyes and styling her auburn hair into soft, elegant waves. When she looked in the mirror on Friday night, she didn't see the invisible library archivist. She saw a beautiful woman, worthy of a fairy tale evening. Le Jardin was the most exclusive rooftop restaurant in the city, a place where crystal chandeliers hung from a glass atrium, and the minimum table charge was more than Cora's monthly rent. As she stepped out of her cab, pulling her trench coat tight against the evening chill, she felt a knot of pure dread in her stomach. The maître d' looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her slightly scuffed heels before checking the reservation list. "Hastings, party of 2. He murmured, his tone dripping with practiced condescension. "Right this way." He led her through a maze of velvet booths and wealthy patrons draped in designer labels. Finally, they arrived at a secluded corner booth illuminated by candlelight. A man was already seated there. But it wasn't the suave tech investor Chloe had promised. The man sitting across the table was wearing a garish leopard print button-down shirt, unbuttoned halfway down his chest. He was aggressively chewing a piece of gum, scrolling on his phone, and when he looked up, his eyes were devoid of any warmth. His name was Bradley, a known bottom feeder in Chloe's social circle, an aspiring prank streamer who was notorious for his obnoxious internet stunts. Well, well, well. Bradley sneered, leaning back in the plush booth. Chloe wasn't lying. You really did dress up. Sit down, Cinderella. Cora froze her hands, gripping the edges of her small clutch purse until her knuckles turned white. A cold realization began to wash over her, freezing the blood in her veins. Where is Oliver? She managed to ask, her voice trembling just enough to betray her panic. Oliver. Bradley laughed, a harsh, braying sound that drew the attention of a nearby table. Babe, there is no Oliver. You really thought a millionaire wanted to take the library mouse out to a Michelin-starred dinner? Sit down before you make a scene. Cora's flight response screamed at her to turn around and run out the glass doors. But her legs felt like lead. She mechanically slid into the booth, her mind racing. Why would Chloe do this? What was the end game? I'm leaving, Cora whispered, finding a fraction of her courage. Oh, you can't leave yet. Bradley smirked, tapping his ear. Cora suddenly noticed the small, discreet earpiece tucked into his left ear. The show is just getting started. Smile for the camera, Cora. We have about 5,000 people watching right now. He pointed a thick finger toward a decorative floral arrangement on the table. Tucked discreetly between the white roses was a small, high-definition camera, its red recording light blinking ominously. Cora's breath hitched. Her own sister had orchestrated a live-streamed humiliation, setting her up to be mocked by thousands of strangers on the internet. And as if on cue, a burst of familiar, cruel laughter erupted from the booth directly behind them. Chloe stepped out from the shadows of the adjacent booth, flanked by her boyfriend, Liam, and two of her closest, equally venomous friends, Jessica and Piper. They all had their phones out, cameras pointed directly at Cora like weapons. Look at her face, Chloe cackled, the sound slicing through the sophisticated hum of Le Jardin. Oh my God, chat, did you see the moment her heart broke? I told you guys she'd fall for it. She actually bought a new dress. Cora sat paralyzed. The midnight blue silk dress she had felt so beautiful in just an hour ago now felt like a clown costume. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, restricting her lungs. Chloe, please, Cora whispered, hot tears prickling the corners of her eyes. Turn the cameras off. Why are you doing this? Because you're pathetic, Cora. Chloe said, her voice dropping its faux cheerful tone and adopting a venomous edge. She stepped closer, leaning over the table. You walk around acting so superior with your books and your morals, judging me for how I live my life. I just wanted to show the world how desperate you really are. To add a physical punctuation to her cruelty, Chloe reached over and grabbed Bradley's half-full glass of red wine. With a flick of her wrist, she splashed the dark crimson liquid directly onto the bodice of Cora's blue silk dress. The wine soaked through instantly, a cold, staining badge of disgrace. Gasps rippled through the immediate vicinity of the restaurant. Some patrons looked away in discomfort, while others watched with morbid curiosity. Bradley laughed uproariously, slapping the table while Liam continued to film. Cora closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking down her carefully powdered cheek. She felt utterly, profoundly alone. She moved to stand up, desperate to escape, but Liam shifted his large frame, blocking the narrow exit between the tables. Hold on, the stream needs a reaction. Tell the viewers how it feels to be the ugly twin, Liam mocked. But the reaction they got wasn't from Cora. The atmosphere in Le Jardin shifted. It didn't happen gradually. It happened in a sudden, terrifying instant. The ambient chatter of the restaurant died. The clinking of silverware ceased. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room, replaced by a suffocating heavy tension. From the secluded VIP alcove just 10 feet away, a man stood up. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal grey suit that hugged a broad, muscular frame. His raven black hair was perfectly styled, but it was his face that commanded absolute submission. He possessed sharp, aristocratic features, marred only by a faint silver scar that traced from his left temple down to his jawline. His eyes were a pale, icy blue, holding a chilling indifference that made grown men cross the street to avoid him. This was Vincent Romano. To the general public, Vincent was a ruthless real estate developer. To anyone who actually knew how the city operated, he was the undisputed king of the Underworld, the head of the Romano syndicate. He was a man who didn't negotiate. He erased problems. Vincent despised loud noises. He despised public scenes. And most importantly, he despised bullies who disturbed his rare moments of peace. He didn't walk. He glided toward the commotion, his presence parting the terrified waitstaff like the Red Sea. Behind him trailed Matteo, his hulking right-hand man whose knuckles were covered in dark tattoos. Chloe, completely oblivious to the shift in the room's power dynamic, was still laughing. "Seriously, Cora, you look like a drenched rat." "Quiet!" The word was spoken softly, almost a whisper, but it carried a lethal frequency that instantly paralyzed Chloe. She spun around, annoyance flashing across her face, ready to snap at whoever dared interrupt her stream. But the moment her eyes met Vincent's icy stare, all the color drained from her perfectly contoured face. Liam, realizing who was standing in front of them, lowered his phone so fast he nearly dropped it. Bradley stopped chewing his gum, his mouth hanging open in sheer terror. "You are being incredibly loud," Vincent stated, his tone devoid of any emotion. He stepped closer to the table, ignoring the pranksters entirely, and looked down at Cora. He took in her trembling frame, the stained dress, the tears she was desperately trying to hold back. A microscopic shift occurred in his cold eyes, a flicker of dark, dangerous intrigue. I'm sorry, Mr. Romano." Liam stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager's. "We were it's a joke. Just a joke." Vincent slowly turned his gaze to Liam. "A joke." He reached out and smoothly took the phone from Liam's trembling hand. He looked at the screen, noting the thousands of people watching the live stream. Without breaking eye contact with Liam, Vincent crushed the expensive device in his grip, the glass screen shattering loudly into the palm of his hand. He dropped the broken pieces into Liam's half-empty water glass. "I don't find it funny," Vincent murmured. He looked at Bradley next. You spilled wine on this woman." "No," Bradley squeaked, backing up against the booth. "No, it was her. It was Chloe, I swear to God." Vincent's gaze snapped to Chloe, who was now visibly shaking. "Get on your knees," he commanded softly. Chloe stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No, you can't." Matteo took one step forward, cracking his knuckles. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the dead, silent restaurant. Chloe dropped to her knees, right there on the expensive velvet carpet, her designer dress pooling around her. Liam and Bradley quickly followed suit, kneeling in abject terror in front of the entire restaurant. Vincent didn't look at them again. He turned his attention back to Cora. He pulled a pristine silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently offered it to her. "My apologies for the disturbance," Vincent said, his voice surprisingly smooth, a stark contrast to the violence he radiated. "No woman should have her evening ruined by vermin." Cora looked up at him, her hazel eyes meeting his icy blue ones. She was terrified of him. Yet, strangely, in this exact moment, she had never felt safer. She took the handkerchief with a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Vincent extended his hand to her. "Allow me to escort you out. The air in here has become entirely too toxic to breathe." Cora placed her small, cold hand into Vincent's large, calloused one. The warmth of his grip was grounding, pulling her out of the spiral of humiliation and into a surreal new reality. As he helped her to her feet, he smoothly unbuttoned his charcoal-grey suit jacket, shrugging it off his broad shoulders, and draped it carefully over her. The jacket swallowed her small frame, but it immediately covered the humiliating wine stain. It smelled of expensive cedarwood faint tobacco and pure, intoxicating power. Together they walked out of the restaurant. Matteo stayed behind for just a moment, leaning down to whisper something into the ear of a still kneeling Liam. Whatever was said caused Liam to physically sob. The exit was a blur. The maitre d' practically bowed as they passed. Out on the street, the cold rain was still falling, but a massive, sleek black Maybach was idling at the curb, its tinted windows masking the interior. A driver instantly hopped out, opening the rear door, holding a large black umbrella. Vincent guided Cora into the back seat, sliding in next to her. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, instantly muting the chaotic sounds of the city rain. Inside the car was a sanctuary of soft, ambient lighting and plush leather. Cora sat rigidly against the door, the oversized suit jacket still draped over her shoulders. Her heart, which had been racing from the humiliation, was now pounding a different, more terrifying rhythm. She was sitting in a car with Vincent Romano. She didn't know the intricate details of the criminal underworld, but she watched the news. She knew this man was untouchable dangerous, and allegedly responsible for half the bodies buried in the city's concrete foundations. "You're shaking," Vincent observed. He pressed a button on the center console, raising the internal partition to give them complete privacy from the driver. He reached over and opened a small compartment, retrieving a glass bottle of sparkling water. He uncapped it and handed it to her. "Drink." Cora took it with trembling hands, taking a small sip. The cool water helped soothe her dry throat. "Thank you," she managed to say again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that. I have a very low tolerance for disrespect," Vincent replied calmly, leaning back against the leather seat, studying her profile in the dim light. "Especially from people who have done nothing to earn their arrogance. Who were they to you?" Cora looked down at her hands, the shame returning in a fresh wave. "The woman who poured the drink. She's my twin sister Chloe. The others are her friends." A dark, dangerous look crossed Vincent's features, a fleeting shadow that made the air in the car drop 10 degrees. "Your own sister?" He mused, the words tasting sour in his mouth. In his world, loyalty to blood was the highest law. Betrayal by a sibling was punishable by death. To see it played out so casually, so cruelly for public entertainment, disgusted him on a primal level. "She's always been like that," Cora said, almost defensively conditioned by years of making excuses for Chloe's behavior. She wanted views for her stream." "She wanted to break you," Vincent corrected sharply, his icy blue eyes locking onto her hazel ones. "Do not make excuses for those who draw your blood." Cora fell silent, absorbing his words. They were harsh, but they were the truest words anyone had spoken to her in a long time. "Where do you live?" Vincent asked, pulling out a sleek black phone. Cora rattled off her address, a modest apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of the city. Vincent tapped the address into a message, presumably sending it to the driver, because the car smoothly changed directions at the next intersection. The rest of the ride was enveloped in a heavy, contemplative silence. Cora stole glances at him. Up close, the scar on his face looked older, a relic of a violent past. Yet despite his terrifying reputation, he hadn't made a single threatening move toward her. When the Maybach finally pulled up to the curb outside her dingy apartment building, Cora felt a strange conflicting sense of relief and loss. She moved to take off the suit jacket, but Vincent raised a hand, stopping her. "Keep it," he said softly. "It's cold out." I can have it dry cleaned and return it to your office," Cora offered, not wanting to owe a Mafia boss anything. Vincent's lips curved into the ghost of a smile, a rare expression that transformed his harsh features. "I don't care about their jacket, Cora." He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. He probably knew everything about her already. "Get inside. Lock your doors." Cora nodded, opening the car door and stepping out into the damp night air. She watched as the tail lights of the Maybach faded down the street, leaving her standing under the flickering yellow street lamp, wrapped in the scent of a dangerous man. The real shockwave, however, didn't hit until the next morning. Cora was woken up at 7:00 a.m. by frantic, aggressive pounding on her apartment door. She groggily looked through the peephole to see Chloe standing in the hallway, looking completely unhinged. Her makeup was smeared, her designer hair was a tangled mess, and she looked like she hadn't slept a wink. Cora unbolted the door and opened it a crack. "Chloe, what do you want?" Chloe practically shoved the door open, pushing her way inside. She was shaking violently, her eyes darting around Cora's small living room, as if expecting assassins to pop out from behind the sofa. "Who is he?" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill with absolute panic. "Cora, you have to tell me who he is." "Who?" Cora asked, feigning ignorance, though her heart did a nervous flip. "The man from last night. The man in the suit." Chloe grabbed Cora's shoulders, her fingernails digging painfully into Cora's skin. "Liam went down to his parking garage this morning. His car, Cora, his brand new Porsche, was crushed into a literal cube. Just a cube of metal sitting in his parking spot. And there was a note taped to it that just said, 'Keep her name out of your mouth.'" Cora gasped, stepping back and breaking Chloe's grip. "And Bradley," Chloe continued, pacing the floor frantically. "Bradley's landlord evicted him at 3:00 a.m., threw all his stuff onto the street, and my stream, my entire channel has been deleted, wiped from the internet. All my brand deals gone in a single night." Chloe collapsed onto Cora's cheap armchair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Cora, you have to talk to him. You have to tell him we're sorry. He's going to kill us." Cora stood frozen in her living room, staring at her broken, terrified sister. She looked over at the armchair where she had draped Vincent's charcoal grey suit jacket the night before. The events of last night weren't a dream. Vincent Romano hadn't just rescued her from a bad date. He had systematically dismantled the lives of the people who had hurt her, all before the sun came up. She wasn't just a library archivist anymore. She was the woman under the protection of the city's most feared predator. And as terrifying as that reality was, as Cora watched her cruel sister weep in terror, she realized she didn't want the protection to stop. Monday morning arrived with a biting chill. Cora stood on the pavement outside Romano Holdings, a towering monolith of black glass and steel that dominated the financial district. Her modest beige trench coat felt absurdly inadequate against the imposing architecture. Taking a deep breath, she clutched the garment bag to her chest and pushed through the heavy revolving doors. Inside the lobby was an expansive cavern of white marble and brushed silver. A massive, abstract sculpture sat in the center, flanked by security guards who looked more like elite mercenaries than standard building staff. Cora approached the sleek reception desk, where a poised woman with sharp features and a flawless chignon looked up. Her name tag read, "Evelyn. May I help you?" Evelyn asked, her tone polite, but laced with an icy professionalism that instantly made Cora feel entirely out of place. "I'm here to see Mr. Romano," Cora said, her voice surprisingly steady. I I have something to return to him. Evelyn's perfectly manicured eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. Mr. Romano does not take unannounced visitors. If you have a delivery, you can leave it with the mailroom on the lower level. It's personal, Cora insisted, feeling a sudden strange stubbornness bloom in her chest. Tell him Cora Hastings is here. Evelyn sighed clearly, humoring what she perceived to be a delusional fan or a mistaken courier, and picked up her phone. She murmured a few words, her eyes widening slightly at whatever response she received. Slowly she placed the receiver down. Take the private elevator on your left to the penthouse, Evelyn said, her icy demeanor melting into something resembling profound shock. Matteo will meet you at the top. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-dropping ascent. When the steel doors glided open, Cora found herself in a sprawling antechamber. Matteo, the hulking tattooed enforcer from the restaurant, was waiting. He wore a tailored suit that strained against his massive biceps, but his dark eyes held a surprising warmth when he looked at her. Miss Hastings, Matteo rumbled, dipping his head in a respectful nod. The boss is expecting you. He led her through a set of heavy mahogany double doors into Vincent's office. The room was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic god's-eye view of the city. The furniture was all dark wood and black leather, smelling faintly of rich espresso and expensive ink. Vincent was seated behind a massive desk, reviewing a stack of architectural blueprints. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. As she walked in, he set his gold Patek Philippe pen down and gave her his full attention. You didn't need to bring that back, Vincent said, his deep voice filling the quiet room. His icy blue eyes swept over her, taking in her practical clothes, her nervous posture, and the garment bag she held like a shield. I don't like owing debts, Mr. Romano, Cora replied, stepping forward and laying the bag carefully on the edge of his desk. Vincent, he corrected softly. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. And you owe me nothing. If anything, the city owes me a debt of gratitude for removing your sister's toxic presence from the digital sphere. Cora swallowed hard. About that. Chloe, her life is completely ruined. Liam's car, Bradley's apartment. You dismantled their lives in a matter of hours. Are you asking me to undo it? Vincent's gaze sharpened, a predatory stillness settling over him. Cora looked into those dangerous eyes and searched her own soul. For 24 years she had been expected to fix Chloe's messes, to take the high road, to forgive the unforgivable. She thought of the wine soaking through her dress. She thought of the laughter. No, Cora said the single syllable, ringing with absolute certainty. A slow, devastating smile spread across Vincent's face. It was a terrifyingly handsome sight. Good. Loyalty is a virtue, Cora, but blindly protecting a viper just because it shares your blood is a fatal flaw. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of her. His proximity was intoxicating, radiating heat and raw authority. I brought you up here because I have a proposition for you. Cora looked up at him, her pulse quickening. What kind of proposition? I recently acquired the Oak Haven Historical Society. Vincent stated casually, referring to the exact institution where Cora worked as an underpaid archivist. The board of directors is corrupt and incompetent. I am liquidating their positions. I want you to step in as the head director of the Archives and Antiquities Division. Cora gasped, taking a step back. You bought my workplace. Just like that. Vincent, I don't have the qualifications to run the entire division. You are the only person in that dusty building who actually respects the history within it, Vincent interrupted smoothly. You have the passion. I have the capital. But this promotion comes with a condition. A condition? She echoed, her heart hammering against her ribs. There is a charity gala this Saturday at the Waldorf Astoria, Vincent explained, reaching out to gently tuck a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. His touch sent a shockwave of electricity straight to her toes. It is a nest of vipers, politicians, rival families, corporate vultures. I require a companion who possesses genuine grace. Someone who is not intimidated by shadows. I want you on my arm, Cora. It was a contract, protection and elevation, in exchange for stepping directly into the crosshairs of his dangerous world. If I say yes, Cora whispered, looking up into his scarred, handsome face. My life will never be the same, will it? Your old life was suffocating you, Vincent murmured, his thumb brushing lightly against her cheekbone. Let me show you how to breathe. Preparations for the Waldorf Astoria Gala consumed the rest of Cora's week. True to his word, Vincent orchestrated a hostile takeover of the Oakhaven Historical Society, placing Cora firmly at the helm. For the first time in her life, she had an office with a window, a substantial salary, and the authority to preserve the artifacts she loved so deeply. But the true test was Saturday night. Vincent did not just send a car, he sent a small army of stylists to her apartment. They transformed her. When Cora finally looked in the full-length mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. She was draped in a breathtaking custom Oscar de la Renta gown of deep liquid emerald that contrasted perfectly against her pale skin and auburn hair. Around her neck rested a heavy antique Cartier diamond collar, a piece Vincent had specifically sent from his private vault. When she descended the steps of her apartment building, Vincent was waiting by the Maybach. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that made him look like a dark, fallen angel. When he saw her, his icy eyes flared with a primal possessive heat that made Cora's breath catch in her throat. You are exquisite, he murmured, taking her hand and pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to her knuckles. The Waldorf Astoria was a fortress of luxury. The grand ballroom was dripping with crystal chandeliers, overflowing with white orchids, and packed with the city's most powerful and ruthless elite. The moment Vincent and Cora stepped through the gilded doors, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted toward them, sizing Cora up, trying to calculate who she was and how she had managed to capture the undisputed king of the underworld. Cora kept her spine straight and her chin high, channeling the quiet strength Vincent seemed to see in her. She stayed close to his side, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. They navigated the room, Vincent smoothly handling the sycophants and politicians who clamored for his attention. But about an hour into the evening, Cora needed a moment to breathe. She excused herself to the powder room, walking through a quiet, marble-lined corridor. Well, look who finally decided to sleep her way to the top. Cora stopped. Stepping out of the shadows of an alcove was Chloe. Her twin sister looked completely different. Gone was the arrogant, polished influencer. Chloe looked haggard, her eyes sunken, wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like a cheap rental. Her parents must have pulled every remaining favor they had just to get her into the building, a desperate attempt to salvage her ruined reputation. Chloe, Cora said, her voice calm, devoid of the anxiety her sister used to trigger. What are you doing here? Trying to survive, no thanks to you, Chloe hissed, stepping closer, her eyes locked greedily onto the Cartier diamonds around Cora's neck. You think you're so special now? You think he actually cares about you? He's using you to make a point, Cora. Men like Vincent Romano don't fall in love with invisible little librarians. When he's done playing with you, he's going to throw you to the wolves. Are you finished? Cora asked, her tone dripping with an icy indifference that mirrored Vincent's. Chloe blinked, taken aback. This wasn't the sister who normally cowered and apologized. You have to tell him to give me my accounts back. Tell him to pay for Liam's car. It's the least you can do after stealing my life. Before Cora could respond, a heavy, suffocating aura filled the corridor. Your life. A cold, smooth voice echoed off the marble walls. Was a fabricated lie built on the humiliation of your betters. Vincent stepped into the corridor, his eyes fixed on Chloe with the intensity of a predator zeroing in on a wounded rat. Matteo stood silently a few paces behind him, a menacing sentinel blocking the exit. Chloe physically recoiled, pressing her back against the wall, terror instantly replacing her venom. I was just talking to my sister. You do not have a sister, Vincent stated, coming to stand beside Cora. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute lethality in his tone made the air crackle. You severed that bond the moment you prioritized a camera over her dignity. Cora is mine. If you approach her again, if you speak her name, if you even breathe in her direction, crushing a Porsche will be a pleasant memory compared to what I will do to you. Chloe was crying now, a pathetic, silent weeping. She nodded frantically, unable to form words. Vincent turned to Matteo. Have the trash removed from the premises. Disinfect the corridor. Yes, boss. Matteo grunted, moving toward a terrified Chloe. Vincent didn't watch them leave. He turned all his attention to Cora, his expression softening instantly. Are you all right, Mia? Cara. I'm fine. Cora breathed, the adrenaline slowly receding. She looked up at him, realizing the absolute truth of the situation. Chloe was right about one thing. Vincent Romano was a monster. But he was her monster. And in his darkness, she had finally found her light. Good, Vincent murmured, offering his arm once more. Because Dominic Russo has been staring at your neck all evening, and I need to go explain to him why he should keep his eyes on the floor. Cora smiled a genuine, powerful smile and took his arm. Together they walked back into the ballroom, ready to conquer the wolves. Navigating a room full of apex predators required a specific type of armor. For Cora, it was the heavy Cartier diamonds resting against her collarbone, and the unwavering, terrifying presence of Vincent at her side. As they moved deeper into the Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom, the sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns parted with a visible nervous reverence. Dominic Russo was a man who wore his cruelty like a badge of honor. As the head of the city's second-largest syndicate, he had spent the last decade trying to claw his way up to Vincent's throne, leaving a trail of bodies and broken businesses in his wake. Standing by the bar, swirling a glass of Dom Perignon, Dominic watched their approach with a predatory smirk. He was older than Vincent, his silver hair slicked back, wearing a tailored Tom Ford suit that failed to hide the thick, brutish build of a former street enforcer. Vincent! Dominic practically purred as they approached, his dark reptilian eyes immediately dropping to Cora's neckline. I must say, I was surprised to see you RSVP to a charity event, and even more surprised to see you arrive with such a fresh face. I hear she's a librarian, trying to improve your vocabulary. Vincent didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply stopped 2 feet away from Dominic, the air between them instantly chilling to absolute zero. My vocabulary is fine, Dominic. I am perfectly capable of articulating a threat. I hear your shipments at the docks have been facing some unexpected delays this week. Dominic's smirk faltered, a flash of genuine anger tightening his jaw. The delays were a direct result of Vincent's men seizing 3 of Rousseau's illegal import containers just days prior. Business is business. Dominic recovered smoothly, taking a sip of his champagne. He took a step closer, invading their personal space, his eyes entirely focused on Cora. But let's not bore such a beautiful creature with dock logistics. Tell me, my dear, does he make you call him boss in the bedroom too? Or do you just quietly submit like all the other little pets he keeps around until they get boring? Matteo, standing a few paces behind Cora, shifted his weight. The faint rustle of his suit jacket was the only warning before his hand hovered near the concealed weapon at his waist. Cora felt a spike of adrenaline, hot and sharp, pierce through her chest. 3 weeks ago, she would have withered under this man's gaze. She would have apologized, looked at the floor, and tried to shrink into the wallpaper. But 3 weeks ago, she hadn't known what it felt like to be valued. She hadn't known the intoxicating power of standing beside a king. "Mr. Rousseau, is it?" Cora asked, her voice carrying clear and steady over the ambient string quartet playing in the background. Dominic looked mildly amused. "It is. As an archivist, my job is to categorize historical artifacts based on their relevance and longevity." Cora said, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the mob boss. "I've spent the last week reviewing the city's historical deeds, specifically the waterfront properties. It's fascinating how quickly empires crumble when their foundational paperwork is structurally unsound." Dominic's face froze. Cora tilted her head, her hazel eyes completely devoid of fear. "You see, Mr. Rousseau, an empire built on poorly forged municipal zoning permits from the 1980s, isn't an empire at all. It's a house of cards, and I have the original blueprints." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent remained perfectly still, but Cora could feel the sudden, intense heat radiating from his body. He was looking at her, a profound, dark hunger burning in his icy blue eyes. She hadn't just stood up for herself. She had weaponized her intellect, targeting Rousseau's most vulnerable financial asset without raising her voice. Dominic's knuckles turned white around his champagne flute. "You have a sharp tongue for a glorified bookworm. Be careful you don't cut your own throat. Are you threatening my guest, Dominic?" Vincent's voice dropped an octave, resonating with a lethal frequency. "Just offering friendly advice." Dominic sneered, though the bravado had bled out of his posture. He took a step back. "Enjoy the gala, Vincent. Keep a close eye on your new asset. Beautiful things are so easily broken in this city." Dominic turned and melted into the crowd, his bodyguards trailing closely behind him. Once he was out of earshot, Vincent turned to Cora. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out his large hand, wrapping gently around the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was a brand, a visceral claim. "Did you actually find discrepancies in Rousseau's waterfront permits?" Vincent murmured, his lips mere inches from hers. "I did." Cora breathed, her heart hammering against his palm. 3 days ago. I was going to put a dossier on your desk Monday morning." A low, vibrating chuckle escaped Vincent's chest. It was a rare, beautiful sound. "You are the most dangerous woman in this room, mia cara." The rest of the gala passed in a blur of calculated power plays and whispered alliances, but Cora felt entirely untouchable. When they finally returned to her apartment building in the early hours of the morning, Vincent walked her to her door. "Move out of this building," Vincent commanded, softly leaning his forearm against the doorframe, effectively trapping her against the wood. "Tomorrow, I have a penthouse in the financial district heavily secured. It's yours." Cora looked up at him, the emerald silk of her Oscar de la Renta gown rustling softly in the quiet hallway. "Vincent, I can't just let you buy my life." "I'm not buying your life, Cora. I am securing my investment." he replied, though the raw intensity in his eyes betrayed the clinical words. He leaned in, closing the distance between them. His lips brushed against hers, a fleeting, electrifying contact that sent a jolt of pure fire straight to her core. It wasn't a demanding kiss. It was a promise. And you are my most precious investment. 2 weeks later, the transition was complete. Cora was living in a breathtaking, hypersecure penthouse overlooking the skyline, and her work at the Oakhaven Historical Society had become her undisputed domain. She had fired the corrupt board members and begun a massive restoration project on the city's oldest municipal records. But a cornered animal is a desperate animal. Dominic Russo was losing territory, bleeding money from the waterfront zoning loopholes Cora had exposed to Vincent's legal team. He couldn't touch Vincent directly. The Romano defenses were impenetrable. So Dominic decided to strike at the heart. He decided to break the beautiful thing. It was a Tuesday evening. The archives were closed to the public. Cora had stayed late, the only illumination coming from the brass desk lamps dotting the massive labyrinthine basement of the society. She was deep into translating a leather-bound ledger from the 1920s when the building's heavy security doors slammed shut with a sickening metallic clank. The power to the main floor was abruptly cut. The emergency backup lights flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows across the rows of towering mahogany bookshelves. Cora froze, her pen suspended over the parchment. She knew the sound of the magnetic locks disengaging. Someone had bypassed the security system. "Spread out, find her! Don't shoot her in the face, the boss wants her recognizable when we drop her on Romano's doorstep." The voice was rough, echoing down the stone stairwell. Cora's blood turned to ice. She quietly slipped off her heels, leaving them under the antique reading table. She didn't panic. The frantic, weeping girl who had been humiliated at Le Jardin was dead. In her place was a woman who had learned to breathe in the dark. Cora moved silently, using her intimate knowledge of the archives. The basement was a maze of high-density mobile shelving, massive metal tracks that required a hand crank to move. She ducked into Section 4, the medieval antiquities aisle, pulling her phone from her pocket. No signal. They had brought a jammer. Footsteps approached, heavy and unhurried. "Come out, little librarian." A voice taunted, accompanied by the metallic swing of a combat knife being drawn. "We know you're down here." Cora crept to the end of the aisle. Through the narrow gap between the shelves, she saw 3 men. They were heavily armed, wearing tactical vests over dark clothing. They were Russo's hitmen. She needed a weapon. She scanned the shelves, her eyes landing on a heavy glass-encased display near the back wall. It held a collection of 18th-century cavalry sabers. It was locked, but the glass was antique. Taking a deep breath, Cora grabbed a heavy brass bookend from a nearby desk. She waited until the closest thug turned down the adjacent aisle, his back to her. With a swift, brutal motion, she brought the brass bookend down on the glass case. The shattering sound was explosive in the quiet basement. "Over there, Section 4. Cora grabbed the nearest saber, the heavy steel hilt cold and solid in her grip. She didn't plan on sword-fighting heavily armed men. She needed a distraction to reach the subterranean fire exit that led to the subway tunnels. She sprinted down the narrow aisle just as a barrage of bullets tore through the mahogany shelves where she had been standing seconds before. Books exploded into clouds of ancient paper and leather confetti. Cora hit the ground, crawling under a heavy wooden display table as the deafening roar of a suppressed Glock echoed through the room. "I see her under the table." A pair of heavy boots rounded the corner. Cora gripped the saber, preparing to swing at the man's ankles, when the heavy steel doors at the top of the stairwell were violently blown off their hinges. The explosion shook the foundation of the building. Dust and smoke instantly filled the air. "What the hell was that?" One of Russo's men yelled, spinning around, his weapon raised toward the stairs. Through the thick curtain of smoke, a figure descended. It wasn't the police. It was a nightmare dressed in a bespoke suit. Vincent Romano moved with a terrifying liquid speed. He didn't shout. He didn't issue warnings. He held a suppressed Beretta in his right hand, and before the first thug could even pull his trigger, Vincent fired twice. The silenced thwip-thwip barely registered before the man collapsed, two perfectly placed holes in his chest. It's Romano fire. The basement erupted into a chaotic symphony of gunfire. Matteo came down the stairs right behind Vincent, wielding a heavy assault rifle that tore through Russo's men with brutal efficiency. Cora stayed under the table, hands over her ears, the smell of cordite and copper flooding her senses. The violence was absolute and overwhelming. For 3 agonizing minutes, the archives became a slaughterhouse. And then, sudden heavy silence. Cora. The voice was rough, frantic, stripping away the icy facade of the mob boss. Cora crawled out from under the table, her clothes covered in dust and torn pages, the heavy cavalry saber still clutched in her trembling hand. Vincent was standing 10 feet away, stepping over the bodies of the hitmen. His suit was pristine, save for a few specks of blood on his white cuffs. When he saw her, the absolute terror in his eyes vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief. He dropped the Beretta, crossed the distance in 2 massive strides, and pulled her roughly into his chest. "I've got you," Vincent whispered, fiercely, burying his face in her auburn hair. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. She dropped the sword, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face into his chest. His heart was hammering a violent rhythm against her ear. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No," she sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving her shaking. "I hid the jammer. I couldn't call you. I don't need a phone to know when my property is threatened," Vincent growled, pulling back just enough to frame her face with his large hands. He inspected her frantically, checking for injuries. Finding only dust, he let out a harsh breath, leaning down to press a desperate, bruising kiss against her lips. It was a kiss of survival, tasting of smoke, fear, and absolute possession. "Boss," Matteo's rough voice interrupted. He was standing near the fire exit. "We got a rat trying to scurry." Vincent pulled away from Cora, his eyes instantly hardening back into the glacial ice that ruled the underworld. He kept one arm firmly wrapped around Cora's waist, keeping her anchored to his side as they walked toward Matteo. Pinned to the floor under Matteo's heavy boot was the man who had ordered the hit. Dominic Russo. Dominic was bleeding from a gunshot wound to the shoulder, his face pale and twisted in agony. When he looked up and saw Vincent, the defiance drained out of him. "Vincent, wait!" Dominic coughed, blood spattering his lips. "It was a business move. Just business. We can negotiate. You crossed the line." "Dominic," Vincent said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a secondary weapon, a small silver revolver. "You came into her sanctuary. You brought guns into a place of history. You threatened the woman who sits at my right hand. She's just a librarian." Dominic spat, a final desperate burst of venom. "No," Vincent corrected, raising the silver revolver and pointing it directly at Dominic's forehead. He didn't look at the dying boss. He looked down at Cora, his eyes filled with a dark, eternal vow. "She was the empress of this city, and you forgot your place." Vincent pulled the trigger. The echo of the gunshot rang through the archives, sealing the fate of the Russo syndicate forever. Cora didn't flinch. She didn't look away from the blood pooling on the ancient stone floor. She looked at the man holding the smoking gun. The man who had burned down the lives of her bullies elevated her from a life of shadows and executed a rival boss to ensure her safety. Vincent holstered the weapon, turning to her. He reached out gently, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "I will have this place cleaned and restored by tomorrow. I am sorry they ruined the books." Cora looked up at the terrifying, beautiful monster who loved her. She reached up, placing her hand over his, her thumb resting against the faint, silver scar on his jaw. "Books can be replaced, Vincent," Cora whispered, stepping into his embrace, fully accepting the darkness that came with his light. "But empires are built to last." And that is the explosive conclusion of Cora's story. From a humiliating setup by her own twin sister to sitting on the throne of the city's most dangerous empire, Cora proved that true strength isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about surviving the dark and ruling it. If you loved this journey of revenge, mafia romance, and ultimate justice, please smash that like button and share this video with someone who loves a dark romance twist. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more thrilling, heart-pounding stories every single week.